uh, talk this morning, in a way, is a continuation of where I've left on Monday. But at the same time, it's going to take a slightly different course, so it's not going to be based entirely on the Conference of the Birds, but still I do start with a quotation from this lovely book. And the quotation is really the topic of this talk, and I read it for you. The lovely forms and colors are undone, and what seemed many things is only one. And it's actually, I suppose at this point I could say that's the talk, and let's go and meditate on it and see what comes up, because it catches quite a lot of the disturbances, of the confusion, of the misunderstandings, but at the same time also the essence of what this path is about. And what it is about, we have tried to talk all through the days that we have met together, and it's very apt that different answers came, because this is also the tradition. I spoke a little bit about the old compilations, in the Sufi tradition, from the 10th century onwards. There were Sufis who put quite a lot of effort in collecting together, compiling together traditions that have been around for the sake of the disciples in the groups which had been emerging throughout the Muslim world. And in these compilations, sometimes you find a chapter, mostly you find a chapter about what is Sufism. And usually when someone from the West comes to these compilations, either via translation or if they happen to know Arabic or Persian, they say, fine, here is a chapter, now I'm bound to find out what Sufism is. And lo and behold, one goes to the chapter and the same question marks remain. So what is Sufism? Because you get all these lists of statements and sayings and aphorisms which come from different points of view, from different experiences, and you still don't know. And why? Because you have to work it out for yourselves. So in short, I mean, it's quite possible that, let's say, after Mount Madonna, a whole week, we can have a meeting and everyone says what Sufism is, and then we make a compilation and we pass it on to the next generation. I mean, this is how things work. So it is confusion. It is something which cannot be defined. It is something that can be defined only from different points of view, from different experiences, from different angles. And so it's very varied. It has many different forms. And sometimes these forms are very lovely, very appealing. But then at the end, all these forms and colors and statements have to go, because they are not the essence. They are just what glimpses one can have at any one point. And this is very characteristic to Attar. Like I said last time, Attar is always like someone who stands on a higher platform. And when one stays on the higher platform, one sees this, and one sees also the other. Like, for instance, to give a concrete example, I think we all, or many of us, have experienced it to some degree a few days ago when we sat on the veranda on the deck of the seminar building and watched the fog cover the entire valley. And that was the feeling. I mean, here, just one night ago, there was this bustling little town full of lights and probably quite a lot of activity. And there comes the fog and it's all covered, and no town, and no people, and no lights, and no sounds, and no colors, and no nothing. And we feel we are fine because we can see it, we are exposed, we are clear. Next day comes and the fog covers us too. And it's just like very, very faint silhouettes of people emerging from the fog, or you can just hold and see, oh, the silhouette of the hand. But we are also gone in a way. We also have become some kind of ephemeral apparitions, which now they are here and now they are gone. And to capture these two at once, I think, is one of the aspects of Sufism. So you can't always say what it is. But if you can see the fact that it's here, but at the same time it's neither here nor there, you've got something. Now, if I may say, it's a long way. Mrs. Sviri used to sing sometimes kind of to herself, it's a long way to Tipperary, and in a way that would be a kind of a hint to people that things don't develop overnight. I mean, sometimes it takes a long time to find this point, this Archimedean point, this vantage point from where everything exists and is vibrant and full of color and full of vitality and meaning, and yet nothing exists. There's no form and there's no color and there's nothing. So this talk is actually about the nothingness, but the way to the nothingness through the forms and the colors. And I read this quotation from the Conference of the Birds once more. The lovely forms and colors are undone, and what seemed many things is only one. Now, I really would like to take you through this journey through my own experiences of this color and nothingness. But maybe I would like to start first with a statement that one finds again in the old compilations. So there is one compilation which, as far as I know, has never been translated into English, except in a very sort of abstract way by Nicholson. And this compilation is called, I can translate it as the Book of the Shimmering Lights, or the Book of the Oscillating Lights. And in it, this book was written in the 10th century by Abu Nasr al-Siraj, a Sufi author from Baghdad. And in one of his chapters, when he is talking about the quality of mystical knowledge, ma'rifah, and about the qualities of the mystic, the arif. Sometimes it is translated as Gnostic, but I don't think it's very appropriate. It is really the arif is the one who has mystical knowledge, therefore the mystic. So in one of these chapters, he quotes Abu Yazid al-Bistami. I'm sure you've heard about this celebrated teacher of the 10th century, and this is what he writes. When asked to describe the characteristics of the mystic, Abu Yazid said, "The color of water is the color of his receptacle, container or vessel. If you pour water into a white receptacle, you will imagine the water to be white. If you pour water into a black receptacle, you will imagine the water to be black. And so also with yellow, red, and the other colors. States shift the mystic from one to another, but his Lord is he who shifts the states. Now again, I suppose we could stop here and close our eyes and meditate on what it means. And in fact, if we do this, we actually do the practices that the old Sufi groups used to do, because all these statements interspersed in the compilations were meant to be seeds for meditation. So sometimes it's better to stop and say, let's see what it means. But this is not the nature of a talk, so I suppose I should carry on talking. And say that I have always felt, since many years ago when I started studying Sufi literature in Arabic, I've always felt that this phrase, the color of water is the color of his receptacle, is very poignant. I always felt that it's almost like a Sufi koan, one of these riddles that is thrown into the space, into the inner space, and one just goes into it and says to oneself, now what does it mean? I also would like to say a few words about the last sentence in this quotation. States shift the mystic from one to another, from one state to another, but his Lord is he who shifts the states. Now there is something about the Arabic language, like any other language I suppose, which is intranslatable. I mean, you can translate so much, but there's so much which is left untranslated. States is a very important term in Sufi lore. We all go through states of mind, or states of emotions, or mystical states. And the word in Arabic for states is ahwal, or in the singular it is hal. Now what is interesting is that this term comes from a root which in its essence means to change, to switch around, to shift around. So when the Arabic says his Lord is he who shifts the states, I'll say it in Arabic, although you won't necessarily understand the Arabic, but you'll hear it is Rabbuhu, that is his Lord, huwa muhawwil al-ahwal, he who turns the states around. And if you remember this image which Llewellyn had mentioned to us in his last talk, there is this image of the heart which is placed within two fingers of the beloved, and the beloved turns the heart whichever way the beloved wants. So this is the turning of the heart from state to state. So the shifting from one situation to another, from one circumstance, from the sunlight to the fog, from the night to the day, from the in-breath to the out-breath, from happiness to misery, from illness to health, you name it, a long, 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 long list. All these are in the nature of life. It's always shifting. It always is transforming. And why? Because everything is in two fingers, between two fingers of the beloved, of the Lord, who switches it and turns it whichever way he wants. And so what does it mean? If we have this image again, and if we try to place ourselves in this vantage point where perhaps Ataris or other masters have been, the heart turns, and yet there is one point, one center point within the heart which is immutable, which is constant, which is always at one point, at one orientation towards the beloved. And this is the attitude. Things change, but his Lord is he who shifts the states. So this is the orientation which doesn't change. So let's go to the whole business of color and beauty and forms and the variety of things within which we live. Now, you know, again, something that has been mentioned by Llewellyn the other day, there are these two aspects of God which the Sufis talk about, the aspect of majesty, which is the Jalal, and the aspect of love and compassion and beauty, which is the Jamal. And really, the transformation or the changes from state to state can also be seen as the changes from being under the law, under the influence of the Jalal, which produces then the awe, this feeling of fear and terror and darkness, and between being under the influence or under the realm of Jamal, of beauty, which is lush and flamboyant and encompassing and loving. A lot of emphasis has been placed by Sufis on this aspect of Jamal, beauty. You know, according to the Muslim belief, which the Sufis have also taken up, God has 99 names. And he can be called by whichever name is right for any one of the believers. And one of his names is the beautiful, Al-Jamil. And there is a hadith, there is a tradition which says he is beautiful and he loves beauty. So the love of beauty is very much part of the characteristics of the path. It's not a monastic path. It's not a path which turns its back to life, to the glory of life, to the lovely forms and colors in life. On the contrary, it opens up to them because he is beautiful and he loves beauty. Those of you who have read Mrs. Tweedy's book, The Daughter of Fire, will remember, for example, where she describes they were going to a concert and Baisab was saying to them, wear your best clothes. Because Sufis love beauty and Sufis love music, so it's all there. So, how does it come together with this description of the mystic as someone whose color is the color of water? Because, hang on a minute, color of water, what is it? Does it have any color at all? We just heard that there is no color to water. It's just whichever color is the receptacle, this will be the color of the water, so that water doesn't have color as such. So can we imagine a world which is just the color of water? I don't think we can. Because if we close our eyes, and I've tried this, when we close our eyes, just as a kind of trying to experiment with this, immediately there are endless colors and shapes. And again, we can stop here and we can say, let's do this, let's close our eyes. What comes? Some sort of color, some sort of form, some sort of memory, some sort of image. So they come through the imagination, the forms and the colors, and we are bound by them. And it's beautiful. Or terrorizing. And we are captivated by this beauty and by this terror. And sometimes we think, that's it. I mean, some of us are painters, some of us are poets, Some of us are sculptors. So we are immersed in colors and shades and forms. When I wrote this chapter originally, I described an experience which I had quite a long time ago, which amazingly had to do with fish. And so when I heard that quite a few people went yesterday to the aquarium and had some of their experiences, I thought, this is quite interesting. And I'll read to you what I have written. One of the most ravishing experiences of forms and colors that I've ever tasted was watching sea life in the Red Sea. One climbs down a few steps into an underwater chamber surrounded by glass walls. Then one may pick up a point from where to watch the life forms behind the glass walls, or wander around peeping out from different vantage points. And when one does this, an amazing parade of hues and shape passes by silently in front of the eyes of the observer. All sorts of bizarre forms of fish, sea urchins, eels, water snakes, jellyfish, huge cauliflower-like sea creatures extending long arms ready to devour whatever comes in their orbit, tiny seahorses, petrified stars, the coral reef that houses this abundance. Now for me, tasting this glory, this vivacity, inventiveness, gaiety, and also ruthlessness and ugliness, because some of the fish was terribly, terribly ugly to me, was really a taste of these realms of majesty and beauty. That was a very vivid experience which I had, and I don't know if it reverberates in those of you who went yesterday to the aquarium. I don't know if it was a similar kind of experience. I was taken very much by the experience in the Red Sea because of the colors. Like the sea fishes there, the fishes of the Red Sea have colors that I've never ever seen before. Combination of colors and forms. So here we are, captivated by this glory. And then I came across a book which also made a very deep impression on me. And this book was written by a blind man. Some of you may have heard or read this book. It's called in English, And There Was Light. And it's a book that was written by a hero of the French resistance, Jacques Lucéran. And he became blind, I think, at the age of 7 or 8 or something like that, and was a apparently very sensitive boy and remembered very much his vivid life of color before he went blind. But then he writes very powerfully about the ability of blind people to see colors. And what impressed me in his description was the fact that colors can be something inner. I'm not saying now inner in the sense of spiritual, but I'm saying inner in the sense of sensory. I know it's a kind of contradiction in terms, and I think I've heard that this neurologist, Oliver Sacks, has written recently about an experience of someone who has lost his color sight, who became blind, colorblind, not by birth but by some sort of illness, and how progressively he gained back the ability to see colors, but not outwardly, rather inwardly. So I'm not talking about a spiritual experience as such, but a sensory ability to see colors inside. And I was very impressed, so I wrote down these excerpts from this book. And there was light. And here is what he writes. Sighted people always talk about the night of blindness, but there is no such night. For in every waking hour, and even in my dreams, I lived in a stream of light. Colors. All the colors of the rainbow survived. And for me, the child who loved to draw and paint, colors made a celebration, so unexpected, colors of things and color of people. My father and mother, the people I met or ran into in the street, all had the characteristic color which I had never seen before I went blind. It was the same with love. The summer after my accident, my parents took me to the seashore. There I met a little girl my own age. She came into my world like a great red star, or perhaps more like a ripe cherry. The only thing I knew for sure was that she was bright and red. How natural that people who are red should have red shadows. When she came to sit down by me between two pools of salt water under the warmth of the sun, I saw rosy reflections on the canvas of the awning. In the sea itself, the blue of the sea took on a purple tone. That's the combination of red and blue. I followed her with a red wake which trailed behind her wherever she went. So colors can be also an inner experience which is not spiritual as such. And then colors can be also an inner experience which is absolutely mystical. And that's important because when we go into the arena of mystical experiences, one has to say one thing about, I started with mentioning the word hal, state, and God or the beloved as he who shifts one from state to state, muhawwil el-ahwal. But in the lexicon of Sufi terminology, sometimes a synonym word for hal is the word for color. So one can say lawn, which in Arabic means color, in the same sense that one speaks about hal, about a mystical experience or a mystical state. And the situation where one fluctuates from state to state, from station to station, the whole instability, the whole shifting experience is called, again, in the technical vocabulary of Sufism, it's called talween, which means variegation, changing colors. So when we go now from the outer arena, from the artistic, poetic arena of colors, into the mystical arena of colors, there's also the talween, the changing colors. And there were some mystics who were keen in this particular way of describing the inner visions of colors more than other Sufis. I mean, it's all very individual, and some Sufis will describe psychological states, and some Sufis will describe the loved situation, and some will describe visions of color. And one of the mystics who has become extremely well known for his mystical experiences of colors is Najmuddin Kubra. I mean, this is a Sufi who lived in Central Asia in the 12th century, and I'm sure many of you have heard about him either through Llewellyn writings or through the writings of Corbin. Corbin has a book which is called The Man of Light in Sufism, and he devoted this book mainly to two Sufi personalities, Ibn Arabi is the one and Najmuddin Kubra is the other. And so in Kubra's writing, it is the experience of color, of inner color, and the meanings of inner colors, which is of utmost importance. And I read a few paragraphs from Kubra's descriptions of the inner, the mystical world of colors. He says, "You come to gaze with your own eyes on what you had until then only known theoretically through the intellect. When you see before you a great wide space, an immensity opening onto the far distance, while above you there is clear, pure air, and you perceive on the far horizon the colors green, yellow, blue, know that you are about to pass, borne aloft through the air, to the field of these colors. The colors are those of the spiritual states experienced inwardly. The color green," and now he gives an interpretation, "the color green is the sign of the life of the heart." And some people among us are also very much interested in the meaning of colors. What does the color green mean? What does the color blue mean? So here are some explanations. The color of ardent, pure fire, namely red, is the sign of the vitality of spiritual energy, signifying the power to actualize. This is the reddening that Jung talks about, or the alchemists have talked about. If the fire is dim, it denotes in the mystic a state of fatigue and affliction following the battles with the lower self and the devil. So here comes the clairvoyant who can see the auras and interpret the auras. Blue, you will be surprised to hear, is the color of the lower self. And this is why in Central Asia and in other places in the Middle Ages, Sufis used to wear dark blue gowns to symbolize the fight with the lower self. Yellow, again, you'll be surprised to hear, indicates the lessening of activity. All these are suprasensory realities in dialogue with the one who experiences them in the twofold language of inner state or inner taste and visionary apperception. This is important. So we have an experience, and the images which we experience are like entities, like real entities which want to be in some kind of dialogue with us. They want to express something to us. These two, the inner taste and the visionary apperception, are two complementary witnesses, for you experience inwardly, in yourself, what you visualize with your inner sight. And reciprocally, you visualize with your inner sight precisely what you experience in yourself. So that's very much like active imaginations that we sometimes do. We go in a journey where we experience something and there is a projection into an image. And then the image is reflecting back into the inner side. So it's a real dialogue, according to Kubra. And you see how ancient these traditions are. And really, I should mention here, because sometimes people get interested in the work of Corbin, and that Corbin's interpretation has influenced very much archetypal psychology. I mean, this branch of analytical psychology, which works very much with active imagination and with archetypal images and so on and so forth. And so one could read more from these descriptions of Kubra. I will not do it because we have to go on. But here we have an example, and the point that I'm trying to make is that within the Sufi lore, we have this great corpus of writings in which colors become inner experiences. So very much like dreams and active imaginations. But then we go one step further or deeper, whichever way you want to take it. And we come across such statements as, again, we've heard the other day from Llewellyn. And I'm quoting Ibn Arabi now. And Ibn Arabi says, the people of perfection have realized all station and states. So they have gone through all these variegations, changing colors, and passed beyond these to the station above both majesty and beauty. So they have no attribute and no description. Now there is a confusing statement for you. So we can be involved in our dreams, we can be involved in active imagination, in the brilliancy of experiences, in colors and in visions and in images. And yet what we have to keep listening to is this other voice of silence which says, these too are illusions. The people of perfection have realized all stations and states. They had to go through all that and passed beyond these to the station above both majesty and beauty. So they have no attribute and no description. Strange and terribly disturbing, or could be. Because this seems to be the non-state that really the Sufi path has this inner desire to attain, the state beyond all states, the state that can be described only as non-state, the state of fana, where everything ceases to be, where there is no talween anymore, where there is no variegation anymore. The mystic passes away from what belongs to himself and persists through what belongs to God. When centered, he is also dispersed. He is absent and intoxicated because his power of discrimination has passed away, and in this sense all things become one to him. There are no variegation anymore, no images, nothing. And if we remember the conference of the birds again, the keynote of the conference of the birds, I think the keynote of Attar, as a poet who is also a musician, is absorb, melt, annihilate. Here he is some verses from the conference of the birds. The seventh valley, which is the highest valley, Attar describes the journey of the birds as going through 7 valleys. And the 7th is the highest. So the 7th valley is poverty and nothingness. Very disturbing. And there you are suspended, motionless, till you are drawn. The impulse is not yours. A drop absorbed in seas that have no shores. Here again, remember the atom, the drop. First lose yourself, then lose this loss. You see, the annihilation of the fana has to be also from the perception of the fana. Then lose this loss. And then withdraw from all that you have lost again. Go peacefully and stage by stage progress until you gain the realms of nothingness. All that I ever lost or ever found is in the depths of that black deluge drowned. I too am lost. I leave no trace, no mark. I am a shadow cast upon the dark, a drop sunk in the sea, and it is vain to search the sea for that one drop again. See, the Sufi teacher has no face, has no name, has no attribute. He leaves no traces, he cannot be found. Everything is an illusion. This nothingness is not for everyone, yet many seek it out as I have done. And who would reach this far and not aspire to nothingness, the pilgrim's last desire? So see, it's not my commentary, it's really, these things are said explicitly. I'll just read a few more lines from this ultimate experience of the birds coming to be together with a simurg, with the king of birds whom they had sought out. Then, as they listened to the simurg's words, a trembling dissolution filled the birds. A substance of the being was undone. So it's not just the forms and colors. It's the substance of being which even wants anything. A substance of the being was undone, and they were lost, like shade before the sun. Neither the pilgrims nor the guide remained. The simurg ceased to speak, and silence reigned. And so often we've heard or read, God is silence and is sought in silence. So an immense tension, you see, lies at the core of the mystical journey. One cannot say, like some traditions do say, turn your back to everything, become monastic, become ascetic, forget colors, forget forms, forget life. No, we love it, we are captivated by it, we use it, we work with it. So there is this tension between experiences and non-experiences, between mystical states and this ultimate non-state of nothingness. So on the one pole, the ever-changing experiences, which the seeker has to go through. And on the other side of the pole is silence, this nothingness. When we become exposed to it at the beginning, it's a tremendous tension, and really the heart fluctuates, vibrates like mad between these two, because it's real. You know, the only way to say it is either in poetry, in images, or in music, in melodies, or in words like this. But when one is exposed to it, then it's a real agony, a confusion to the mind and an agony to the heart and the body. There's nothing but nothingness, he said yesterday. This is Mrs. Tweedy now, quoting Baisab in Daughter of Fire. There's nothing but nothingness. You see how the tradition goes. From the steppes of Central Asia, 12s, 13s, even earlier, into Kanpur, right in the Indian plains, within a context which is burly Sufi, Hindu, sort of not very clear, and right then into England, and from England to California, and wherever. And the language may be different, but the images are the same. It's the same tone. You know, once the beloved has plucked on the strings of the heart, and it's the same reverberation, repeating itself endlessly. There's nothing but nothingness. The way he said it, Tweedy writes, repeating it with emphasis, and the echo it awakened in my heart, made me think that it was meant for me. It struck me as the most wonderful sentence, and it made me glad. And this is also very interesting. There is freedom in that realization. Not immediately, but eventually there is a liberation, because one is born into another dimension. Speaking of this astonishing state of nothingness, I said that at the beginning it was just nothing. After, there was like a sorrowful happiness with much longing in it. But now it was just wonderful. Why it was so wonderful, I could not say. This feeling is too new and difficult to analyze. When at home, I realized that the answer is contained in his statement of yesterday. There is nothing but nothingness. And it represents a perfect state. That's why it is so wonderful. Now, I want to say this, that any of us, all of us, may not always realize this to begin with. And by the way, there are many things that we cannot realize until we are in a point which we cannot go backward, and that's the trap. So we may not always realize this, but when a real connection is established between teacher and disciple, and when the disciple is exposed willingly, there has to be a yes there. When the disciple is exposed willingly to the energy of the teacher, then a process starts in which the disciple is oscillating not only between polar states, right and left, that is horizontally between the psychological, emotional, physical states of ups and downs, not only between those, but much more intensely, he is thrown upwards and downwards, forwards and backwards, vertically, between two different dimensions of experience, of existence. So it's not on the same level at all. So the pendulum doesn't go only this way. It goes this way and that way, and it all happens together. So that's why it's so very dynamic and so very exhausting. The disciple may not be aware of the subtle transition between the different dimensions, and this unawareness may last for a long time. He may not understand why he suffers so much, because on the level of the mind, why do I suffer so much? Why do I need to suffer? Why? I mean, what's the reason for suffering? There's so much beauty around. He may not understand why the journey involved so many difficulties, so many sacrifices, so many misunderstandings, and why every familiar value is falling away by itself, against his will sometimes. So this is something to bear in mind, really people who have come to this point really say sometimes, like Tweedy mentions in her book, I will warn anyone who wants to come here, don't even start, don't even try. It's a one-way lane. And this is why, because all of a sudden nothing makes sense anymore. And yet there is the pool. And so it's not, this starts when the variegation or the fluctuation is not only on one level, but on 2 or maybe 3 or maybe 7 different levels of consciousness. So there are many questions asked, and we remember the questions that Moses in this famous Quranic chapter asks of Khidr. Khidr tells him, you can join me, I will be your teacher, but you mustn't ask any questions. But Moses cannot refrain from asking, because on the level of the mind, on the horizontal level, nothing makes sense. And not only does nothing make sense, what he sees Khidr do is terrible, obnoxious actions against all sense of law and justice. So he has to ask why. And then eventually he has to realize, like everybody else, that the way to Khidr, the real inner way to Khidr, the real inner way to the teacher, goes through the sea of death. And take it in whichever way, in whichever level, in whichever form it comes to you. Very many different stages of this death until one arrives to this island upon which Khidr stands or sits. So there is somewhere along this very disturbing route, there is the experience of death. And since we are working with the theme of colors, the symbolic color of death is black, the blackness. It is tremendous, and it has to be taken, according to my understanding, not only on one level of understanding, but on many, because darkness can be this dazzling, glorious darkness, the dark light, and it can be also the sheer, pure darkness of inertia, the sheer darkness of soil, of earth, of matter, which is like dust under the feet of destiny. So I'd like to read to you an experience of the black light. And this comes from a 15th century sheikh, Sufi sheikh, also from Central Asia, Shamsuddin Lahiji. And he, because he had this tremendous experience of blackness, of death in the mystical sense, he used to wear only black clothes. That was his externalizing these inner experiences. And here is an experience which he describes. I saw myself present in a world of light. Mountains and deserts were iridescent with lights of all colors. See colors again. Red, yellow, white, blue. I was experiencing a consuming longing for them. It was as though I was stricken with madness and snatched out of myself with the violence of the intimate emotion and tender feeling of the presence of these colors. Suddenly, I saw as if a black light was invading the entire universe. Heaven and earth, and everything that was there had wholly become black light. And behold, I was totally absorbed in this light, losing consciousness. In this experience, the totality takes over. Then I came back to, and eventually he could write this experience down. So the black light is perhaps the deepest paradoxes of mystical experiences. Now it seems to me that at the core of our existences as individual human beings, as separate human beings, as well as at the core of existence as such, there is a void, a black point of nothingness. And sometimes people do realize it. Sometimes they even experience it very early on, when they're not even prepared, and it's sheer terror. But it exists. Physicists talk about it, and mystics talk about it. There's a void. We can go so far, but somewhere we reach the edge of knowledge, the edge of experience. It's like the edge of the world. And there's still something there. And yet, in some mysterious way, this void is experienced, and it does become known. But at the moment of experiencing it, its totality takes over, and in the face of the black light, everything perishes. That's the night of Fana. The black light alone exists. Very difficult for the mind and very disturbing for the psyche. So, we go back for a moment to this statement in which we have started. What is mystical knowledge? And how do you describe the mystic? And we remember Abu Yazid's statement, the color of water is the color of his receptacle. And so we wonder how these two experiences come together, and what is really the color of water, like the color which cannot be described. And you see, this is the other side of the darkness, which when one comes back from the darkness, one doesn't have any opinions anymore. One is like water, the fluid. One doesn't go into polemics. What does it matter if the beloved is he, or the beloved is she, or the beloved is it, or whatever? There's absolutely no opinions, no statements to be made. And in this compilation that the 10th century compiler Abu Nasr al-Sarraj quotes the statement of Abu Yazid, he himself, the compiler, gives a commentary. And this is what he writes. Abu Yazid's statement means, and God knows best, Wallahu alam. I offer my commentary, but it's only my commentary. God knows best. So what Abu Yazid means is that the water, to the extent of its purity, reflects the color of the receptacle. Yet the color of the receptacle does not alter its state of purity. The observer imagines that the observer imagines, I should emphasize, that the water is white or black. But the water in the receptacle is neither white nor black. It is in one constant reality. Thus also are the mystic's features in relation to God. Notwithstanding the changing states which overtake him and shift him from one to another, his innermost heart, his sir, which means secret, is with God in one constant reality. And now I'll offer my commentary, and God knows best. When water is pure, it reflects the color of the container in which it is contained. This container may be anything we are contained in a particular moment. Our physical state, our psychological state, our spiritual state, even our mystical experiences. All these are different parts and aspects of the container. These aspects lend color, distinction, and characteristics to our existence. And we behave differently in different situations. Look at us now. Look at us at the break, when we eat, when we are in small groups, when we are in big groups, when we are at home, when we wash the dishes, when we sleep. Different circumstances, always changing. There's no rigidity. But all these changing circumstances do not touch the core of the mystic's being. At core, he or she is free and unidentified. I think this is a word that we in our modern parlance use. We remain somewhat unidentified. And this is also the guideline. As long as we are identified with anything at all, and it can be very commendable, it can be very praiseworthy, it can be a big project for humanity, for anything. As long as we are identified, that in us which is identified is the ego, it is the I. And it's fine to be involved in projects or in things. But it's either to be identified with the beloved or to be identified with that project. So the identification is important here. So all these changing circumstances do not touch the core of the mystic's being. At core, he or she is free and unidentified. Because viewed from the core, all is connected to the source of being, to that void, to that nothingness. And this is the real poverty of the heart. I can go through things, but I don't own anything. To the extent that the water is pure, it has no color of its own. It has no character, no features. It exists in order to reflect whatever passes on its way, whatever throws its reflection upon it. So the teacher, sometimes like a good therapist, will reflect back, will not be anything, will be empty. Just reflect back whatever throws its reflection upon its water. And ultimately, within its very depths, the water reflects the black light of the absolute darkness. Which again can go into the image of the still water. There's depths upon depths upon depths, and there is the black darkness of the absolute. And therefore, the masters have always prayed to become colorless and featureless. And in this vein, the great master of the Naqshbandi Brotherhood, to whom we all feel affiliated. In this vein, Bahauddin Naqshband has said, "For the last 22 years, I have been following in the footsteps of Abu Abdallah al-Hakim at-Tirmidhi. As he was colorless and featureless, so I am now colorless and featureless. He who knows, knows." So if we can just go into the silence for a few minutes before we break. So I was just saying that once before when I gave this talk, people were prompted to bring forward some experiences or dreams which had some relevance to the images interspersed in this talk. So I wonder whether this is what some of you would like to do now, or would like to ask, or whatever feels right. The fan. Can we have the fan on? Because some people are...
We can open the window a bit.
Or the window open, or... Is that better? Yeah.
Otherwise
Okay.
it all doze off.
That's right. Yeah.
Sufis found asphyxiated after listening to Sara talk.
Died of fix. At least they know what they died of, which is something.
It's like in those, those early Sufis talks when you hear about some saint gave a talk and 20 people collapsed and died. They always had it in those stories.
And in the last breath, they did the mantra, of course. Don't forget that. You laugh.
That's the congregation.
Next time they open the window.
We were just talking in the kitchen about the sense of being in an earthquake, that in those 4 seconds there is absolutely nothing because the earth has shifted under your feet and then you're right back again on the earth. And that's all.
Yeah. Yes, you are thrown back with a thump. This is in one of the versions, huh? Flung back. Yes.
I had a dream in the very, very beginning of my experience with all of this, which was about 4 years ago. I think I had been to one meeting. And I never told it, but I've always been, it's really been a very strong one for me, in which I was in a room that was very dark. And it seemed to be suspended. And I couldn't see anything, but I knew I was in a room, and there was a window in the room that had some moisture on it. There were little droplets of water. And because of that, and because there was a source of light somewhere, I had no idea where it was, the droplets were reflecting light in this window. And it was the only light anywhere. And as I looked at this window, there were 3 pathways came up through the droplets. And I knew them to be the paths of my 3 children. And they removed the droplets from these 3 like lines up the window. And because of that, I was either forced or invited or offered the void, the darkness, through these 3 pathways. And it was terrifying, absolutely, as it is described. horrifying because I knew it was endless and it was completely dark and there was nothing. And I've always been curious about why it was the paths of my 3 children. It seemed that they were giving me this experience. It was like a snail going up the pane, wiping away the moisture so there was no longer the reflection.
Yeah. I think it does happen also. Remember the people who shared their experiences were saying that it's something that came very much at the beginning or very early on or even years before finding a teacher. It's interesting. And of course much more terrifying because being with a teacher kind of prepares the vessel or the container, and to be given it right from the void without any preparation can throw you into really madness, momentary madness. But it's there. And I think it's one of the things that we try to avoid all our lives. And even when we are on a so-called path, we try to avoid it. So I think much of our engagement with experiences, dreams, active imaginations, interpretations is also, everything has also a shadowy aspect, and the shadowy aspect of that to me would be to really shut our eyes from the experience of the void, because we have to do something, and that's very terrifying. And at the same time, there's if it comes at the right time, the right place, to the right person, there's a lot of joy, can be a lot of joy and sense of liberation in that. So, like in everything.
Sara, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
When I was a child, maybe about 7, 8, 9 or something like that, my real life was so horrible that when I would go to bed at night, both my sister and I, we would pray. First, we were Catholic, so we would say the rosary, and then we'd hold hands, and then we would let go of each other's hand. We shared a room, and I would go into this. I would imagine the blackness, and I would go way out, and I always thought, well, it's longer than the night, and it's longer than he can torture us. And so it was very powerful, and it was great. It wasn't frightening to me, but the more happy my life became, the less I could go into the blackness. And so now when I meditate, I usually see oftentimes the blue light, which is the lower side, you said. So it's
according
interesting.
to this tradition,
Yeah.
There are other
Yeah.
traditions too.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it was for me it was, I couldn't wait to go there because it was this place that I had that was my own, and I knew it would never end because it was infinite.
Infinite.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And it's there, I suppose the law is that as we develop our inner life, we transform. So those who have been introverted become extroverted. Those who had known very horrible and experiences all of a sudden find joy, and those who have been outward going and become more introverted. And so, because it has to be full. It has to be full. The secret is it has to be full, not one-sided. And I've known many people who have all of a sudden become very introverted, and by nature they are extroverted, and the other way around. So. Yeah.
Part of a dream that I had, it was about 1.5 years ago. I was taken into a stone basement and was shown a sarcophagus that was opened. And I thought I would see a dead body, but what was there was this black, black, black liquid that was beyond black. And the person who was taking me to show me this then put her hand into the blackness, and it brought tremendous terror out for me. And I remember that, but there was something that was so compelling about the quality of that black that I can't even begin to describe.
Wow. I think we only call this mystical experiences. It's just an experience of what is there, really, except that we build up all these defenses not to really see it because it's too frightening for the mind, but it's there. And so children may have it, or people may have it out of the blue in a dream, and it's there. The edge of knowledge, the void.
Oh, and I just remembered that I was told that the blackness was the essence of his life, of the person who had died.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, when that experience came, say when one was unprepared for it,
Speak up.
when that experience came as maybe as a child, when one was really unprepared for it, and one is so stamped with the terror of it that there's no separating the experience from the terror. I guess you just wait for grace, or
I know there is one person here who could say more about it. I would not mention a name, but if they want to say something, maybe they won't, maybe they will. Never mind.
no answer yet.
Yes. Yeah.
I had this experience when I was about 20. I was standing in front of a window, and I had just come across an exercise to do with prayer. And I did much what Sarah described. I looked at myself in all the ways of my life, and I said, well, that's not me, because it doesn't stay the same. And I looked at another area, and that didn't stay the same. And I gradually threw them all out. And then suddenly, there was just a black hole. And I didn't exist. And I was totally terrified, and I shut the door on it. And set out to find out who I was, because this couldn't be true. I mean, I had to exist. And it's kept coming back over the years, and sometimes I could touch it, and sometimes I had to find another explanation. And then as Sarah described it again today, there's an essence which is really what she's saying. But for me, there's a lot of it which was also psychological, and I did have to do the work around the psychological sense of not existing. And then I can come back to this other essence. That's what I can say. That there was more for me at that stage. And this was many years before I knew anything about this.
This coming back is very important. It's really, the experience is not complete without the experience of coming back. As a practice, the teachers will do that. This famous story, I think it has been told so many times, about Panditji, who used to go into very deep states of consciousness in front of Baisab and Tweedy, and Baisab would sort of all of a sudden push him a little bit and say, Panditji, how is your wife? And he would come with rolling eyes and he would say, oh, she is okay, and then go back into Samadhi. And after a few minutes, Baisab would say, and Panditji, how is your mother-in-law? And so it would go on, and Tweedy being Tweedy one day just said, but Baisab, why are you torturing this poor man? He said, Because we have, one of the things that I'm training you is to be able to move to one world to the other, like the twinkling of the eye. And that's the real training. We are no drones and no lotus eaters. Is that the way the saying goes? Yes. But we stand with our feet firm on the ground, and with our head we carry the vault of the sky. It's part of the training. It's not... Sufis have been woken up with a thump or whatever if they went into ecstasy for too long. And sometimes they were left, depending on whatever the teacher saw right to do, but the coming back is of utmost importance. So one gets involved. One gets involved in things. One works for. I mean, service is very important. Service first of all, service for oneself, one higher self, then service for the group, then service for humanity, wherever it goes. But the thing is that once one has this experience, there cannot be any identification. I don't own anything. I can belong to the Liberal Party and have liberal opinions or whatever, but I don't really own them all. So, I mean, everything becomes on two dimensions or many more all the time. It's not easy. It takes a long time, and I think it's not easy for people to live with such people. So one of the things that Sufis have done, they have learned also, in the tradition at least, they have learned to camouflage themselves, to be sort of really discreet, but not in the sense of, oh, I have a secret, I'm not going to tell you, but indescribable, featureless. You couldn't exactly underpin the people, and also they would belong. I think this thing came up the other day, belonging to an organization, even to an organized religion. It was a good thing to do, because this way you would camouflage the essence. You could say, I am a carpenter, or I belong to the union of college teachers, or psychotherapists, or weavers, or whatever. In the Middle Ages they had guilds and associations, craftsmen association. You could belong to one of them. You were even distinguished from the other guild, because every guild, or whatever it's called, had a different costume, a different color which distinguished it. So you would wear the habit of the profession. So people wouldn't be able to say, oh, he's a Sufi going, but they would say, oh, he's a barber, for instance, or cobbler, or whatever, because that was very outward, that would be very conspicuous. And this way, the essence would be concealed, because it's not about displaying it. So people would never call themselves anything. In these old compilations, in the chapters about what is Sufism, or why were the Sufis named Sufis, there's one statement that I like very much. It is attributed to Shibli, who was known to be a little bit, kind of nut, and who would go into all sorts of states of mind. But he was an important teacher, and he said, why were the Sufis called Sufis? Because of something which remained of their lower selves. So but the moment you say, I'm a Sufi, I mean, I am, the ego is, and so there's a name for it, but somewhere there's no name for it. And usually disturbs, I know that when I was teaching Sufi texts and in Arabic, and students would come across this statement, it would be very confusing. Does it mean that they were called Sufis because of something which remained of the lower self? It's like gobbledygook a little bit, but it's like the Chinese say that Tao is nameless. If you can name it, it's not the Tao. And By the way, I've brought a little quotation from Chuang Tzu. It was given to me by a friend in London after reading the talk, and I think it's very lovely. I read it. It's called The Lost Pearl. And notice the colors in the description. The yellow emperor went wandering to the north of the red water, to the Kwanlun Mountains. He looked around over the edge of the world. On the way home, he lost his night-colored pearl. He sent out science to seek his pearl and got nothing. He sent analysis to look for his pearl and got nothing. He sent out logic to seek his pearl and got nothing. Then he asked nothingness, and nothingness had it. The yellow emperor said, "Strange indeed. Nothingness, who was not sent, who did not work to find it, had the night-colored pearl." So it's another way of putting it, I guess. So yes, it's very much like the Tao. Taoists will say, if you can name the Tao, it's not the Tao, so it's nameless. It's that space, it's this spaciousness, which is really without rigidity. You see, there are no dogmas. The moment you have a dogma, that's it, and you lose the spaciousness. And the nothingness is the spaciousness. And Moira just reminded me that we used to quote herself and quote Bicep saying there's nothing but nothingness, and then she would say, but there's no such thing as nothingness. No, always if you thought you grasped something, it would be demolished, because this is the fullness. Take fullness away from fullness and fullness remains. Yeah.
There's a really moving line in one of Llewellyn's books to me that says, at this point in the discussion, and that nothingness loves you.
And that nothingness loves you.
I felt that.
And loves you. Yes. 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 It's the blackness of blackness, like in your dream, which is the way the mind translates the essence, which has no limitations, no character. But it's really the spaciousness. Like that's why the description of the desert and the description that I read from the beginning of the Conference of the Birds a few days ago, this spaciousness can cause you to feel terror, but it can also cause you to feel really enfolded by it. It's the ocean of total being. I mean, this is when it is said, it sounds like a philosophical concept, but it's not. There's a totality somewhere, and we are part of it. And yet we pop up like individualities, individual persons. Somebody else?
At the end of a dream I had earlier this year, it was pointed out to me a cave in a cliff, and I was told it was the way to God. And I was drawn to this cliff with my feet off the ground. I was drawn to this cliff and into this cave. And it was just total blackness, and it was the smell in the dream, which was so strong. At first it was the smell of the dampness, the cave dampness and the ancientness. And then there was this feeling of fear, and then this feeling of disappointment, and they were drowned by the smell of nothingness. Mm-hmm. I know it makes no sense, but it was really the smell of nothing.
It makes no sense. It casts no image. Yes. Somebody else wanted to say, yes, Karen.
Well, this happened to me when I first read Daughter of Fire in 1988. And I was really angry. I was just rageful. And so I went into a space and I picked up the book to try to contain my anger. And was reading the book and then fell asleep with the book on my chest because it was very moving to me. And I don't know if it was a dream or it wasn't a dream, but it was like, but it was a place or not a place. It was like a matrix, because nothing was familiar or, and it was so incredible that I thought if it lasted one more second, I would die. And then there was a real direct message, like a dream after that, about what to do. Real practical. You know, get your pillow and go back to this other room.
Yes. Yeah. And I think people have experienced that and also recorded that practicality, because this nothingness is also the emptiness into which true messages which are needed for the moment are also sent. You know, when we think, what does it mean to get a hint or to get a message, sometimes it floats into this emptiness, which is another way of saying nothingness.